For most travelers, North Dakota's national park bucket list starts and ends with Theodore Roosevelt National Park, a place of rugged badlands and bison herds. Yet there was once another national park in North Dakota, small and largely forgotten, Sullys Hill. Established in 1904 under President Theodore Roosevelt, Sullys Hill faced an unusual fate, eventually slipping from the National Park Service's radar and transitioning into a national game preserve. Let's delve into how one site went from a high-profile proclamation to a lesser-known conservation area, and why so few people realize it was ever labeled a national park at all. The story begins with Theodore Roosevelt's broader conservation push in the early 1900s. Across the country, he aimed to protect natural wonders, forests, and wildlife habitats, and also recognized the significance of localized scenic spots. Sullys Hill, near Devil's Lake in northeastern North Dakota, was considered worth preserving for its rolling hills, woodland patches, and potential for bison habitat. Initially placed under federal control, it became Sullys Hill National Park, though overshadowed from the start by more famous destinations out west. Unlike Yellowstone or Yosemite, Sullys Hill's terrain was relatively modest. It encompassed several thousand acres of prairie, hills, and stands of oak and ash trees, which offered a pleasing landscape but not the towering vistas typical of big-name parks. Access roads were rough, funds for park facilities were scarce, and its location in North Dakota's quieter region didn't draw huge crowds. Moreover, the brand new National Park Service was still taking shape, juggling priorities between large western parks and smaller sites back east and in the Midwest. Sullys Hill thus hovered on the periphery of major budget allocations, receiving minimal attention or infrastructure development. Some local residents appreciated the park designation, hoping it would spur tourism near Devil's Lake, which had its own reputation for fluctuating water levels. But when visitors came expecting major national park amenities, they often found a modest area lacking the grandeur or lodging options other parks boasted. As the 1920s progressed, managers realized it might not align perfectly with the mission of building large-scale public recreation. Instead, the site seemed better suited for wildlife conservation, especially bison and elk populations. In the early 1930s, authorities decided that the best future for Sullys Hill lay outside the realm of the National Park Service. Through administrative changes, the park was redesignated as a national game preserve, focusing on breeding and protecting bison, elk, and other native fauna. Over time, it moved under the purview of different agencies, eventually landing with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. As a result, the official status of Sullys Hill National Park quietly faded, replaced by a more specialized wildlife management approach. People visiting or reading about Sullys Hill would no longer see it on lists of national parks. Instead, they discover a small gem dedicated to bison herds and migratory birds, overshadowed by big hitters like Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Today, the place is known as Sullys Hill National Game Preserve, offering a short driving loop to spot bison, elk, and various bird species across its gently undulating landscape. It never developed the robust lodging, interpretive centers, or massive attendance of more recognized parks. That low-key ambiance means travelers who prefer off-the-beaten-path nature might enjoy exploring its prairies. If you pause to read historical markers, you'll catch glimpses of the time when federal orders labeled it a national park. Yet for many in the park system, Sullys Hill remains a footnote, part of that early wave of conservation sites that existed briefly under NPS, but never attained star status. The transformation exemplifies how flexible the American approach to preserving land can be. If an area doesn't thrive as a national park, it can shift to a game preserve or another category under the broader environmental umbrella. This reclassification also highlights how the concept of national parks grew more selective over the years, often favoring sites with large scenic grandeur or monumental historical value. So, Does Sullys Hill's short-lived era as a national park mean it failed? Not necessarily. Instead, it found its true calling in wildlife management, stepping out of the shadow of bigger parks. For those who love lesser-known stories in the NPS tapestry, Sullys Hill reminds us that not all federally recognized landscapes remain national parks forever. Some pivot toward narrower goals, quietly continuing the work of conservation under a different sign. Visitors today might see bison grazing contentedly on rolling plains, evidence that the site's rebranding into a game preserve ultimately served both the land and the animals well. Nevertheless, the label Sullys Hill National Park stands as a curiosity, a historical stamp of Roosevelt's vision, now a part of the past.
That wraps up our look at how a once official national park changed over time. Curious about other sites that shared a similar fate? We've explored Mackinac Island's short national park status, Sullys Hill in North Dakota, and more. Check out those videos in our series for more surprising stories of America's lost or rebranded parks. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the name changes, but the land still holds its magic.